Bingo, bango, and a bongo. It is Multiplier here. Multiplier here to tell you how to do mastering EQ correctly. And the magic here is we're going to take all the guesswork out of it and do it instead scientifically. So how do we do this? Well, we do this by measuring the EQ of a track that's good or perfect, and then comparing that measurement to a measurement of our track to make some sort of change if we want to. Now, I'm going to stick my headphones on, but this is purely for aesthetic reasons because I want to take all the subjectivity out of this and focus on the objective science. So what we're going to do is, well, in fact, we're going to use, reason why I hesitate will be for reasons I shall explain later. So I'm going to use, just because it's the one that most people have, iZotope Ozone 7, noting that there are, of course, other plugins that do the same sort of thing. So minimize that. Bleep, 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 bleep. So we're going to go to the equalizer section, EQ, just focusing on that, and go to matching. That's what it's called in Ozone 7. So matching, turn it on, then we measure. So I find my reference, in this case, Knife Party Bonfire. Again, more on this to come. So find your reference, click capture, and play. And give it some time. Time. Very funny, Diplo. Very. That's yes. That's a funny cat. I know. It's a very funny bonfire. Marvelous. So now we have this perfect reference, the ideal balance of frequencies that we can then compare against for our own track. Word of caution though, before you settle on a reference and learn a reference as a perfect example, what I recommend you do is run at least 30 or 40 different tracks in your desired genre through this, thereby giving you a feeling for the range of tracks out there. And you should, after running say 30 or 40 tracks, you should know which are the perfect references and which are the weird little outliers that aren't actually perfect. Different tracks in different genres will have different EQ readings or tonal balances. So what you have to do is you have to run at least 30 or 40 different tracks through this to get a feeling for which are the outliers, which are the middle ones, which ones are perfect, and therefore allowing you to choose a perfect reference, but also know for any given genre how much outside of this reference you can realistically get away with. For example, this track Bonfire from Knife Party. This is the example of the most super loud, the brightest, the most perfectly maxed out loud track possible. So I know this is almost like an upper limit for EQ balance. In fact, if you take lots of genres, deep house, any less aggressive genre, if you take a less aggressive genre, it will have a reasonably straight curve like this, but chances are I'll be slanting down a little bit more, but it will never be slanting a little bit upwards from that curve. So I know, even if I'm not making aggressive dubstep, I can still use this as a reference because I know how, say, a tropical house track will look against this. I must have run 400 or 500 tracks in total through here over the last 4 or 5 years or so. So I've got a very, very good feeling for each different genre, what sort of curve you can get away with relative to this reference. I've learned this as the reference. Awesome. So then we take our track. Notice this currently is a pre-master. More about that in a sec. Noting this is a pre-master. I can run this through here, but this time, at least in Ozone 7, I use this target audio bit. Capture, play. And again, give it some time. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall, had a great fall, Humpty Dumpty. And there we go. So I can hit stop, and look at that. Oh, it's tried to be clever. Let's turn that off. Cool. How do I'm going to move these nodes. Get out my face, nodes. Get rid of these nodes very quickly. How can I make that bigger? That's what she said. Ignoring the horizontal line, which is all very confusing. What you can see in light blue is the reference track that we know is perfect and the loudest, most brightest loud track in the world, but perfect. And then the light yellow line, yellowy orange, we'll go for yollange. This is our track, and we can see and therefore compare, and therefore, if we want to, make a decision. Maybe we see this little Humpty Dumpty here, this Humpty Dumpty right in between 1.5K. So what we could do maybe is bring it down a little bit. Maybe we go to, just maybe, band 4 do a bit of change that a bit, maybe just a little bit, maybe just a little bit like that. Who knows? Remember, this is just information we can work with. Maybe this little guy poking his head up over there. What you doing? What you doing? We need to use a. There you go. We'll use this little guy and maybe do more surgical vibes. Just pulling down a bit of EQ. Maybe a bit of that. I mean, this is of course all just you get the idea. What we can do is I'm just going to get rid of that too. We can take our track, compare it to the reference, and therefore make decisions. Scientifically, noting that some of these fancy plugin guys can try to automate this for you a little bit. So you can say have an amount control and it's a smoothness thing, so it creates a bit of a shape for you. But I personally prefer to do it myself, although sometimes it does a pretty good job. So maybe give it a go. Give the matching curve thing a go, and if you don't like it, just ignore it. Either way, you can use this to learn lots and lots about your track in a way that's not just guessing. Now, in practice, what I actually do for reasons that are quite confusing and slightly annoying, Isotope, if you're watching this, please do correct this in Ozone 8. So I actually use something called Ozone 5, which is 2 less than Ozone 7, so 2 generations back, because over here, go to equalizer. So this is just a few years old now, quite a few years old now, but really, really cool. Because in Ozone 5, you could actually save snapshots, which I've apparently not spelt right. Bonfire. It's a bonfire. I spelt it wrong, but that's okay. You can see as I just loaded up Ozone 5 here, I have this reference, pop to screen. I have this reference, Knife Party Bonfire, which I actually don't like the color of. Let's make that. The color's not important. Anyway, you can see as I loaded this up, I had this reference all ready to go. So I can run my own track in any genre through and compare it to this and therefore make decisions accordingly. More knowledge to come right now. After having looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these things, I pretty much know what a good reference looks like. So when you're choosing a reference, the thing you want to look out for, one of the main things to look out for is that from, I don't know, pretty much the lower mid frequencies upwards, it needs to be reasonably straight. Now it can be slightly curvy, but it shouldn't be Humpty Dumpty like a camel. What it should be is kind of straightish, maybe with a bit of a curve, definitely curving off a little bit with the higher frequencies. Reasonably straight, a bit of a curve's okay, but reasonably straight the whole way through. It shouldn't have a big valley. It shouldn't have a crazy big sort of a spiky resonant frequency or like a crazy snare or whatever poking out like 4 dB louder than the rest of the curve. There shouldn't be any major holes in the mix. Also, the thicker the track is, the more distorted it is. Think dubstep, think electro house. If there's a lot of distortion or big thick synths in there, then almost certainly there won't be many gaps. It'll be almost like all the little holes are filled in one component of a full sounding mix. Now, when using this technique, you still have to pay attention a little bit, because in some genres and for some types of tracks, you won't actually have that completely full spectrum. If you're making a techno track plus hi-hats and stuff, if say you only have a kick, a bass and a hi-hat, then obviously you won't have a completely full spectrum. You may have the lower and the lower mid frequencies looking about right, and then there'll be a little bit of the mid and the high frequencies that look about right from the hi-hat, but it won't necessarily fill up the entire frequency spectrum. For example, maybe there's a bit of a dip around 500 to 1000, where you've only got some quiet harmonics from the kick and the bass and no frequencies from the hi-hat, because maybe the hi-hat starts around 1000. But then if say the hi-hat goes from say 1000 to 4 or 5000, just theoretically, then you can still balance the hi-hat from 1000 to 5000 by comparing that to the reference. So a bit of judgment is still required. But the cool thing about this technique is it takes the guesswork out of it. Totally forgot. Really, really important this actually. I should have mentioned this again earlier, but I'm telling you now. So hopefully you're still here. If you're still here, great. When you do limiting, this will change the EQ balance a little bit. You need to also check after you do the limiting, because when you do limiting, this actually changes the EQ balance a little bit. It might only be a tiny, tiny amount if you set up your limiter in such a way. If, say, you're not doing too much limiting and the mix is set up in quite a balanced way, the EQ balance may stay pretty similar, but some mixes and some amounts of limiting can quite drastically change the EQ balance. So yes, I measured the EQ on this pre-master to learn something about the mix, but then what I would do after completely mastering the thing is run it through this measurement again. Stereo imaging, harmonic excitement, dynamics processing, all of this can change the EQ balance. In fact, stereo imaging in particular tends to boost higher frequencies, as typically in stereo imaging you increase the wider frequencies, making it sound wider. But as a result, you've increased those high frequencies. So definitely, at least the way that I like to work, do measure your EQ before the main bit of mastering to learn something, but then also do it afterwards to make sure everything is still okay. Awesome brains, awesome brains, awesomes, awesomes, awesome. That is how to do mastering EQ correctly. My name has been Multiplier, and I will catch you guys on the flippity flip.